Here's what I figured out, just so if anyone wants to use this app for the future.
Please.
I have my phone in landscape mode because it sits in that tripod, and in landscape mode, it hides the option that says number 2 to join the video conference.
Very interesting.
So when I turned my phone the other way, suddenly there was a second option. Sorry about that, everyone. That's technology.
People are cheering like, yay. Yeah, everybody's like, oh, get your son to help you. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I would for
no
certain.
one's here.
No, nobody's here. But just to repeat, just to kind of go over, I went over a few things with folks before. We're trying to make this interactive, but just as a disclaimer, not meant to diagnose or treat or prevent any disease. Dr. Sharlin can't give any specific medical advice, nor can I. But just informative and educational, and I'm just so pleased to have him on. Remember, just to kind of refresh everybody's mind, Dr. Sharlin is also not only a functional medicine doctor, but a board certified neurologist, an author who wrote the book just recently, The Neurologist Toolbox. He's a 3-time triathlete finisher, and he's an international lecturer, and he's just really an out of the box thinker. So I'm really excited to have him here so we could, just talk about and interact and answer any questions and just really pick his brain. So thank you for coming. We're very honored to have you.
Well, thank you, Ron. You've done a wonderful job carrying the torch, sharing the message, and really inspiring others to follow and find their own purpose in this journey.
Well, I was kind of forced into this. I never chose this path, and so it was kind of my wife and my children are like, yeah, you're not quitting. You got to go to work and back to work. So here I am. And so, I showed a video before of my first video, which was me kind of working my legs against the wall when I could barely walk. And it went viral and got 1 million hits.
Wow.
Who would ever knew? And that was about 3 years ago. So from then I thought to myself, wow, there's a lot of people that are really hurting like me. Okay, this is something we could do together. So, and then along came Dr. Wells, and then along came you. So, life is awesome. Not always what we plan.
Yeah, no, there's sort of a spiritual aspect to it all. And I think we just kind of find each other, and there are reasons why we find each other on this 3-dimensional planet of ours. So
I couldn't agree more. So, my questions, and I'm sure like others, what makes you different from a regular or allopathic neurologist? I suppose maybe we could start there.
That's fine. And let's just even take that a step further and say, well, what makes me similar, right? Because I went to medical school.
Thank you.
I have an MD.
Yes.
Graduated from Emory back in 1992, a few years back. And then I went on and did my postgraduate training in neurology at the University of Virginia and then Vanderbilt University. So I've been out there practicing standard conventional neurology for a while. That's not a bad thing. I think that gives me sort of a foundation in understanding what goes on in the body in terms of disease and how to manage it. But what it doesn't really tell you about is the person, right? The person with the disease. And that's where functional medicine comes in, because functional medicine embraces the unique story of each individual person. And while ultimately we want to change the trajectory of the disease, in either case, in allopathic or functional medicine, functional medicine really, by embracing the uniqueness of that individual, strives to understand why it is they got ill and aims to help the individual find the resources they need to get onto a different path toward healing.
Okay, so quoting from your book, not necessarily trying to match the patient with the pill, but actually find the root cause of the disease. Is that
Find the
fairly
root cause.
accurate? The root
Yeah.
cause.
They say pill for an ill, right? That's sort of the conventional approach. You got MS, okay, we're going to put you on Copaxone, Avonex, Beta-Seron, whatever, Gilenya, Tecfidera, so on and so forth. That's the pill for an ill. Pill, injection, infusion, whatever. But that's not how functional medicine works. Functional medicine aims to really identify all the little triggers along the way, from pre-birth, really, through the time of
Pre-birth.
birth. Yes, to understand what are the factors that you sort of carry with you genetically and epigenetically into this world. Things that are not necessarily hardwired to your genes, but affect the way that your genes are expressed. That's epigenetics. And then what are all the factors that characterize your life from that time of birth? You know, were you born by cesarean section? Were you breastfed or bottle fed? Did you maybe have a lot of ear infections when you're a kid and get antibiotics? Did you have any concussions? Were you exposed to mold or heavy metals or other factors that may drive disease? What was the environment of your home? Was it a high stress environment? Are you kind of the type of person that's always, you know, very, very on the edge, stressed out, you know, type A personality? Because that definitely affects your hormones and your immune system, and things go from there. So it's never a one thing. It's kind of a lot of everything.
Understood. Very, very good. Can we take a step back, though? Because you were a traditional neurologist, and what brought you to functional medicine?
Well, you know, I'd been practicing for a while and getting increasingly, I want to say disillusioned, but unhappy with how things were going, unhappy with the toolbox that I had to help my patients. I saw people getting sicker and sicker. I saw a few real good solutions for them. You know, there's there's a fancy word in medicine that gets thrown around by doctors, which is idiopathic, IDIOPATHIC. And that actually means we don't know. And it's a convenient trap door. You know, why did I get sick? I don't know. It's idiopathic. We don't know. Take the pill, right? That's not very satisfactory.
Okay.
So
not necessarily disillusioned, but you thought or you figured out there are other ways to approach.
there had to be other ways. And about the same time, I was exploring some pretty hardcore fitness. I was training for the Ironman triathlon. I knew that the actual training plan itself didn't just include the number of hours I spent swimming, biking, or running, but it had to include things like nutrition and how nutrition played a role in my fitness, or concentrating on, you know, my sleep quality, or, you know, how my body was responding to stress, because the athlete that's overstressed is overtrained. And then sort of falls apart. So I knew those things were important for me, and I felt like they had to be important for my patients as well.
So that had to take incredible discipline, fortitude, in order to overcome, so to speak, and become a triathlon. Not only triathlon, Ironman, which is quite a bit more difficult. So I see that you apply the same type of philosophy to your patients, that the patients, the pill is not doing the work, that the patient also has to participate in the recovery. Would that be accurate?
That is very accurate. It's a very proactive approach with functional medicine. So it's, you know, it is confusing to some folks. The idea that I'm a doctor who takes this holistic approach is very understandably appealing. I get that, and I welcome that very much. Yes. I love to see my patients, but at the same time, you have to kind of look under that cover and see what's going on and what's actually involved in this approach, because there's no question that it does take work. It's not simply substituting a handful of supplements for a handful of pills. Because as far as I'm concerned, if we're just doing that, then the supplements are pills. They are drugs, and that's really not the goal. And just like the drugs really aren't really fixing the problem in the long run, neither are the supplements.
And that's a paradigm shift in thinking, well, across the United States and, well, universally, I suppose. So then take us a little bit back. So you go and study functional medicine, and then you begin to implement in your practice. And I mean, from reading your bio and all, I mean, you and your team have seen symptom relief in Parkinson's, in multiple sclerosis, and diabetes, and quite a few other autoimmune type diseases or diseases in general now.
Right. I primarily focus on conditions affecting the nervous system in my practice, but everyone that sees me brings with them all their health issues that contribute to that. So, for example, in Alzheimer's disease, we do a lot of Alzheimer's work. Alzheimer's is sometimes called diabetes type 3 because those imbalances that characterize diabetes, high blood pressure, abnormal lipid profiles, do play a role in actually creating this thing that we ultimately call Alzheimer's disease.
Interesting. And so if we could dive a little deeper, and I'm just going to put up a picture of your book there. And I had the privilege to I probably read the most of it today, but can you take us through a little bit? Because I think one of the first things you talk about is assimilation, and maybe that's something that starts in the gut. And all us MSers, we hear this phrase leaky gut and gut health, and we down all these probiotics and we do all this. Can you give us a little insight there?
Absolutely. Thank you for putting that picture up. I actually the book is available in Kindle right now, and we've got a brand new cover if you check it out. So I encourage folks to look for it. The book is called The Healthy Brain Toolbox.
Through Amazon.
Through Amazon right now. Yep. So anyway, what you're asking about is that functional medicine is based on something called systems biology. And the very simple way of thinking about this is that normally, I'm a neurologist, so you say, well, what do neurologists do? Well, they deal with the brain. And then you go see the gut doctor, the gastroenterologist. What do? Well, they deal with the stomach and the intestines, or maybe you have a heart problem and you go see the heart doctor, the cardiologist, right? So what that really says is that in conventional medicine, the body is divided up into organs. It's as if these organs operate completely separate from one another, which is a completely artificial division, completely untrue. Every organ is connected. Every organ is affected by the other. And so instead of thinking about things in terms of specific physical organ systems, we can think about functional systems, meaning how does the body work and what systems are involved with how the body works. And that allows us to further embrace the fact that those systems don't act in isolation, that they are connected. So one of the systems is assimilation. And assimilation primarily refers to the gut, but it includes things like the lungs or the skin, because we assimilate oxygen through the surface lining of the lungs. We actually absorb and excrete through the skin. So really talking about membranes through which we absorb and excrete. And certainly the gut is very, very important when it comes to that. So we start to break that down. We want to begin to think about what happens to food from the moment it goes in your mouth till it goes down the feeding tube in your stomach, and it's broken down by acid and digestive enzymes that have actually already started to work. There's salivary amylase, so it starts to work in your mouth, but a lot more is broken down in your gut, in your stomach, and then moving down through the intestines. There's interaction with bile, for example. There is interaction with microbes that live in the gut, and there's interaction with the immune system. And ultimately, the job is to be able to selectively absorb what the body realizes are helpful nutrients through, but exclude the things that are not nutrients, that are even potentially toxins, and to ultimately get rid of those through the stool. So it's a process of assimilation and then excretion.
So is it safe to say this is kind of something that I tend to work? It's not necessarily what we eat, but what we assimilate or what we absorb. And so taking, and I noticed in your book you talked about, I believe it was a Parkinson's patient that came in with, I'm going to throw a number and I don't remember it, like 60 supplements. So if we're throwing down X number of supplements, but our gut health is not there, or we don't have the bacteria or the ability to utilize it, then this is all for naught. No,
it's all for naught, right? So the lining of the intestines is one cell thick. Mostly when we absorb nutrients, there has to be some, I always think of it like a castle, right? With the moat around it and the big gate in front. In order to get into the castle inside, ideally, that gate has to be lowered over the moat and then you walk through. In that process, there are guards, right? Normally guarding the castle. That's your immune system.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out there's also a lot of bacteria and other microorganisms down there that play an incredibly important role making up who we are as human beings and interacting with that immune system as well as the food that we eat. So we are, in a sense, a giant ecosystem that needs to remain in balance. So we've got to get through all that. We've got to let that door down. We've got to cross the moat, get into the castle, and hopefully we're a friendly visitor, because if we're an unfriendly visitor and we get into the castle, then we start to wreak havoc throughout the body. And that's basically leaky gut.
That's basically leaky gut. So to look at bacteria as more of a symbiotic relationship, that we are just carriers of trillions of bacteria that work with us or against us.
That's right. Some are friendly, some are not so friendly. And the balance of bacteria is altered by things like the food that we eat, but even the thoughts that we have. It's quite amazing. Yeah, you can alter your gut through your mental processes, through your emotional self. We've all experienced that, right? A test or something else that's stressful and you're running to the bathroom. There is that very strong brain to gut connection, not just gut to brain.
Through most notably now that the vagus nerve that we are now finding that it's both afferent, efferent, or coming and going, correct?
That's an important connection, absolutely. It's not the only one, but it is a very important one, right?
Okay. All right, so I'd love to get to the mental part, because that's my biggest struggle, and for the folks I talk to, it seems to be one of theirs. But before we go there, at the Wallace Protocol seminar, that we had a number of microbiologists that through their studies, through their work, have shown that multiple sclerosis patients have a very different microbiota or very different gut bacteria. So as a proactive MSer like myself, I think, well, boy, I'm just going to start taking all these probiotics. I'm going to start getting all this stuff in. And I'm only beginning to realize now, and correct me or steer me, give me some insight, or give the folks an insight. If the garden isn't there, that's my analogy I use. If the garden isn't proper, if I'm throwing seed on the driveway, nothing's going to happen. But if through prebiotics or through the proper diet, is that the way you would approach the prebiotic? I'm sorry, the bacterial issues of the gut, or what's your
Right. So what we're basically saying is that these tools that are out there, whether they be some particular strains of friendly bacteria, lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, that we generally refer to as probiotics, whether it be some supplements that truly can be helpful. The thing is that you have to get your garden ready for planting, right? That's the imagery that you're using. So it's not just a matter of sitting back and popping these pills. It's
Okay.
creating that foundation for it to work. I mean, if you go to the extreme, some people probably know that there's actually what they call fecal transplants. And this is quite effective for treating a condition called C. difficile or C. diff colitis, pseudomembranous colitis. But within research circles is being looked at for other conditions. Most recently, I saw a research study on autism in children, and they're doing the fecal transplants. And there was some modest improvement, to be sure. But if we're going to create an environment for sustained improvement, for maintenance, right, we have to change that trajectory. And that's where all of those lifestyle factors come in.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Because is that where what you recommend, the 9 cups of vegetables, it actually turns out to this insoluble fibers, or can you be a little more descriptive on how to create that proper garden?
Well, the foundations are sleep, movement, nutrition, what I like to call stress resilience, and connection.
So diet's only part of the list, but not maybe not even at the top of the list. I mean, not to undermine diet, right. but right. We have to consider. Okay, that's very interesting.
Right. I mean, it may be that from a lifestyle factor viewpoint, that the most important thing in conditions like Alzheimer's disease may actually be movement or exercise. Exactly. But these are subtle differences. Overall, we have to do all the basics. We have to work on all the basics. There's certainly plenty of folks who say my food is really dialed in. I'm 100% Walls compliant or whatever,
yes.
And yet I'm not feeling better. Well, how you sleeping? Oh, let me tell you, my sleep is just awful, right? So,
yeah.
There's a lot of important stuff. The sleep is about much, much more than simply closing your eyes and waking up 7 or 8 hours later and feeling rested. There's a whole lot of important biology that happens with sleep. And if we don't sleep, that biology doesn't happen. And that's why we're still kind of torn up. So all of it goes together.
So mind, body, and spirit. This is what we eat, how we move, how we think. Just to put it in the most simplest form. Boy, we could probably spend an hour just talking about sleep hygiene, right? Everything from blue light to caffeine to alcohol to what we do before bed, what we do in the morning.
Yeah, I would say, that probably the 2 big things that we do as a society is, number one, we tend to spend a lot of time indoors. We live under, bright lights all the time, which really mess with our biology. And we do tend to use a lot of stimulants, but unfortunately, I think we're a very stressed out culture, and that tends to feed into the problems as well. So getting outside, getting some sunlight, letting that sunlight hit the back of your eyes, don't put on polarized lenses all the time. I mean, I wear glasses, they are polarized, but I take off my glasses, get some sunshine, respect the setting sun. That's what really we're biologically designed for, right? To go to sleep with the setting of the sun, or shortly thereafter. That's the timing of melatonin release. So the more we drift away from this hardwired biology that we have, the more we tend to get sick. And, that's really the story of functional medicine. I would say, sometimes I say functional medicine would never have existed if it weren't for the last couple of 100 years, because, if we gathered our food as we probably should, ideally, if we, slept with the rising and setting of the sun, if we spent more time just interacting with each other as human beings, not through the phone, not that this isn't wonderful, but,
I understand.
we would probably be a whole lot healthier. Life would be a lot harder in some respects, no doubt about it. But in terms of the things that plague modern society, these chronic diseases, a lot of them would go away.
So that brings up a good point, because as I speak to folks, they talk about the blue zones and they focus on their diet, but I think few focus on their lifestyles. As I'm beginning to learn that the blue zones not only eat a certain way, but they also act, and their form of community, their form of work, their form of stress relief, their form of sleep. I mean, just everything you've said seems to be in line with ancestral health.
Yes, I think that the lessons of the blue zones is very important. I mean, after all, all of these approaches that we take to some extent aren't really proven, right? They're theoretical. We don't have long-term prospective studies of the Walls protocol. We don't. We know that some people have gotten extremely well, starting first and foremost with our dear friend, Dr. Terry Walls. But what we can look at is those real life successes, right? In the long run, I mean, the blue zones, people who live to be 100 and healthy, what is it that they're doing with their lives? I think that science is right there.
Science is right there. So that's when we get into, well, amongst other things, we could talk a little bit about stress and how we deal with that. For somebody dealing with chronic disease, I think life is stressful enough. Now you throw that in, it becomes almost unbearable at times. I'm speaking for myself and probably for many others. So I noticed in your book that you have therapists that you enjoy working with, and I believe is with your clinic. What kind of recommendations for management of stress could you put in the most general sense?
Well, I guess the most important message is take time every day if you can, even if it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, take time every day to just step outside your, your active life, get yourself in a quiet place, just do some quiet breathing, pick some affirmations if that's helpful, things to focus on. There are many, many tools in this area. Everything from apps for your phone, breathing apps and meditation apps, wonderful podcasts. I'm a big fan of Tara Brach. I recommend her work highly. There are others out there, to tapping, which is a very powerful tool, EFT, binaural rhythms, if that's a tool that resonates with some of your followers, to try. So the good news is that there are many paths to this mountaintop, but it's critically important to take some time every day and exercise that part of the nervous system that we call our parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest.
So just to clarify, a sympathetic nervous system, a flight or flight, like if you're going to get hit by a car, you're going to kick into this flight mode. Where your parasympathetic might be something that you might be in the twilight hours of sleep or resting, or this is something that we have to tap into more. Is that accurate?
Right. Both are important. Without our fight or flight, our sympathetic nervous system, we'd ultimately get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. We wouldn't know what to do to defend ourselves, right?
True.
So we do need that. But, heck, we live very busy lives, all of us. All of your, listeners do as well. So, but, oh gosh, from the alarm going off in the morning, you kind of want to peel yourself off the ceiling. if you have a loud alarm and worrying about, oh, I got to get the kids up out of bed, got to get them to school, the husband's going to work, the wife's going to work, whatever, got to fix breakfast for everyone. I got a project due at work. I'm just making this up, but this is real life. This is what we deal with. And then now we're layering in who's messaging me on Facebook, or have I, what's the latest tweet, or what's going on with North Korea? I don't know. There's plenty of that to worry about. Plenty.
So just to put it in perspective, folks, in my decline, which was rather rapid the last 5 years, I lived on Motrin, caffeine, and just anything I could. I worked in the OR for 8 to 10 hours, and I would just about carry myself out. The Motrin, the ibuprofen I took, and whatever I could to get by. I just feel that was like the final straw. I just drove myself right down. So I could attest exactly what you're saying. And furthermore, I watch my children, and they can't get their heads out of their iPhones, and it was the worst thing I ever did was buy them that. Okay, let's move on a little bit. In your book, you have a chapter on movement and exercise. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, again, I think that just like all of those other lifestyle factors are important, movement and exercise are important. And we like to, because this book is about the brain, it's not about necessarily, improving your cardiovascular fitness. Remind folks that when you do move, you are actually doing a lot of important things for your brain. The thing that gets the most attention is a hormone called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's a growth hormone. Mm-hmm. And exercise seems to be a potent stimulus for upregulation and release of this hormone, which in turn plays a role in harnessing the power of stem cells, what we call pluripotent cells in the brain, to become new nerve cells and to replace dying nerve cells. So if you want to grow your brain, then exercise for sure. We also, there's a lot of, when I say exercise or you say exercise, it can mean a lot of different things. Sure. I saw a new patient in my office today. I said, well, you exercise? She said, well, yeah, we bought one of these things, and basically she was describing an elliptical machine, and she gets on the thing, in 10 minutes, she gets in 10 minutes a day, and then she walks around her house, and that's her exercise. But what we emphasize are far more complex movements. Anything that crosses the midline. So my trainer actually teaches our patients how to box, because not that we're hitting anyone, of course, it's not that kind of boxing.
Understood.
But the complex combination of movements makes you think. So it not only works your body, but it trains your brain, and it stimulates neuroplasticity.
I haven't made this announcement yet, but tomorrow morning we're going to have Daryl Edwards, and he's from Primal Play. And his work is all about that we don't need to work out as much as we just need to be like children and move and do exactly what you're saying, crossing the midline. Yes. And I really enjoy his work. And so that what you're saying resonates. And tomorrow morning at 8:00, he lives in United Kingdom, so it'll be early, but if you guys want to tune in, and hopefully we could address that a little bit as well, to reinforce what Dr. Sharlin has said. So I want to take you a little bit into your practice a bit, and you are the founder of the Brain Tune-Up, which it's really, really interesting name. Is the Brain Tune-Up, again, you just unpack that a little bit, is that similar to what you're prescribing in the book?
Yes. So the book accomplishes a couple different goals. It's a great handbook for those who do come to my office, helps them to understand that bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish. So I love to have my patients read the book, have a copy of the book. And then, of course, it's also written to give guidance to folks who can't necessarily come and see me, but want that approach that is similar to what we do in the office. Some things we can't do. We can't draw your blood, can't collect your saliva or your stool, that kind of thing. But aside from the laboratory testing, the foundational concepts are there. And there's no question about it. If you follow the type of guidance that I'm giving in the book, that you can come a long way to improving the health of your brain.
Okay, in general, and not specifically, but somebody that may be struggling with an autoimmune disease or a neurologic disease, at what point should they seek, it's probably a tough way to answer this, but seek guidance of a functional neurologist? Because, for example, being a doctor, I could get discounts on and nutraceuticals or supplements, and I could, but pound those down. But without any real direction, Terry Wall's book is absolutely incredible. But even she prescribes the fact that at some point, if you're not receiving the results that you want, that perhaps you need to seek functional medicine guidance.
I think that sums it up very well. If you're not getting the results, if you're not seeing the results that you want, then possibly that would be a good opportunity to seek out someone trained in functional medicine. The key is implementation, right? It's one thing to have the book, but then how do you do it? Or even if the information is there, can you engage that information in such a way that you're a very self-motivated, self-directed person? It's not a problem for you to take it out of the book and apply it. Takes a lot of discipline. Some people might need a little more advanced testing. There's certainly advantages to having that testing done, but I don't want to elevate the testing to a point that it somehow is more important than the basic stuff. You got to build the foundation. You got to work on the food. You come and see me, we're going to work on the food. You come and see me, we're going to work on the sleep and the movement. That's part of the deal. I get a lot of requests from folks that, can't I just come and have those tests done? Nope, you can't. The reason is because you got to know what to do with those tests. And it's not just a matter of taking some activated folate or a little more of your fish oil. That's not how it works. It's a total package. You got to do it all. It's a juggling act, but we help teach you to juggle. That's the key. We get you juggling.
So that passive approach we'll touch on again. That passive approach is just it's just not what you teach or what your work is about. It's about taking an active role in your disease management, symptom management.
Yes.
So I noticed that in your book, you don't claim that we cure diseases, but you talk about the fact that we can control the symptoms.
Well, and I also say we can change the trajectory, right? We can change the expression of that disease. There's always going to be that susceptibility. For those who are listening or who know stories like Dr. Wall's, real heroes out there who have altered the trajectory of their illness, we have to remind folks that Dr. Walls does still have MS. She doesn't try to hide that, but Dr. Walls is really completely just a remarkable human being, to go from being in a tilt reclined wheelchair to being able to ride her bicycle, 20 miles in a stretch. That's just absolutely remarkable. That's changing your trajectory despite the fact that you have MS. You don't have to be victim to the disease.
I'm just going to put a couple of statements, because we're getting a lot of these where people are saying, well, I can't exercise because I have rheumatoid arthritis, or I can't exercise because so then I'm going to kind of speak for you a little bit, and you could kind of clarify. So then by what you're saying about your work, then it seems to be a stepwise approach, that Dr. Walls didn't go on the bike the first day, that she had to accomplish a certain level before she could participate in exercise. Is that accurate?
It has to be stepwise, and it has to be personalized. I did see the comment shared by one individual. That doesn't mean we're sending folks out the door to run their first 5K when they come to my office. In fact, they won't do anything like that the whole time they're with us. Amy Gordon, who is a wonderful individual. She's my trainer, works with all our patients. She takes people where they are. What is your condition? What is your ability?
Just to
What
back
do
that
I
up a
think
little
you
bit,
might be capable
she's
of?
a physical therapist.
She's a licensed physical therapist. She also has certifications in various areas of personal training.
So, my wife's a physical therapist as well, and she constantly takes and evaluates and designs the program specific for me. So that's the unique job of a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, that they'll be able to take a look at you and say, okay, this is what I recommend, or this is, rather than just go to the gym. I mean, I see this, I've learned a lot over the year. 90% of the people I see at the gym, they're on that treadmill and they're running for hours and hours and sweating and they just nothing's happening. And so I've become an unwilling workout enthusiast in learning. So that's not what you're prescribing. You're not prescribing just that
No.
endless catabolic or muscle wasting type exercise in dieting down and et cetera, et cetera.
No, we start very simple, very simple. Amy does, just like you'd have an assessment from me or any other doctor, Amy does a baseline assessment. She's very experienced, and she's going to design a program that's right for you. So she's not going to push you beyond, far beyond your limit. She might push the envelope slightly, because that's a little bit of what exercise is about, but still within a reasonable comfort zone and safety zone.
Excellent. So advice then that you could provide in a very general way to people struggling with an autoimmune disease. I suppose educate yourself, whether it's Dr. Terry Wall's book or Dr. Ken Sharlin's book or others, and begin to make changes. And then I suppose that if you're not seeing the results, as we said, that we should seek guidance. I found that through my journey, I did the diet and exercise, and I made some great accomplishments initially. I couldn't even speak this way because I had such incredible brain fog that I would have dysphagia. But now I'm at the point now where I almost feel like I've plateaued, if that makes sense, where I've went as far as I can go and not necessarily go any further. So my idea is perhaps now I should seek some guidance. Would be that what you would suggest to most folks experiencing such that?
Yeah, I mean, there's that old aspect of sort of know thyself, right? There's lots of education, for example, for professional people and really anyone via webinar, right? I'm the type of person does a lot better when I go to a conference. I could watch that lecture on webinar, but I just function better. I know myself. I like to be there in person. I just respond better. What is your profile? I mean, do you do okay with a book? The book is interesting. It's still definitely worth reading. Maybe you just say, I know that if I just try to do this from a book, it's not going to work for me. I need a human being.
Absolutely.
I need a team. So maybe some people just go directly to the team. Maybe other folks want to give the book a try first. It's just whatever's working for you.
Understood. Whichever your the best learning, best way you can assimilate information is. Absolutely. Right. That's a very, very good point. There's a few questions that pop up about, and it kind of, you've answered all these questions already, but most folks, including myself, we're always looking for that magic bullet, like the Cambria protocol, where with high dose vitamin D. And so I think you've already answered that question, that it's not just going to be one thing. It's like a tree, and a tree that's got many branches, and some of those type of, so to speak, protocols could be rather dangerous.
And that's one of them that I personally think is potentially quite dangerous. I mean, I could stick the word protocol after anything and it sounds science-y, and then, a lot of people are attracted to it. But, maybe this isn't the arena to discuss the pros and cons of
Correct.
disease-modifying therapy, the conventional drugs. But, look at it this way. The companies that develop these medications, they put themselves out there in a very big way. I mean, they go through all kinds of levels of heavily regulated, extremely expensive clinical trials, and they will tell you that, based on the results of our phase 3 clinical trial, there's approximately a 30% reduction in disease progression in terms of disability progression or relapse rate, or what, that's an example of some of the drugs. Some of the drugs have a more potent response rate, but nothing's greater than about 50 or 60%, right? So the point is, we're also telling you that, hey, somewhere between 40 and 70% of the people are not going to respond to our treatment. That's real life, folks. I mean, that's, these drugs definitely have dangers, definitely have side effects. You always have to weigh out the risks and the benefits. I'm not prescribing anything in that regard. All I'm saying is that when we have these protocols that make these big claims, show me the science, right? It's like Jerry Maguire, show me the money. Is it published in the New England Journal of Medicine? Is it published in JAMA? Is it published, in Archives of Neurology or the Journal of Neurology? Or is this somebody who's, maybe put something out there in an open access journal that anybody can publish in, or maybe not at all? I mean, look, this is serious stuff. You're putting very high doses of vitamin D in your body, and it's well recognized that there are definitely risks associated with doing that.
Understood. Thank you for that. Now that you touched base on the disease-modifying drugs, can you speak to that a little bit? Because I understand from your book and from listening to some of your lectures that it's not an either or, that the drugs aren't all bad and the food is all right, or that there has to be some type of common thought, and maybe the use of both. Or can you just speak to that in better terms? I'm not doing a very good job of putting words in your mouth, but because that's the I'm hit with the most. Should I start this? Should I start that? And I say, well, I don't know about that, but let's start with what we do know. If we get your diet and your lifestyle right, then the drug is a different conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot of this is really just about communication. And if you were my patient, which you're not, just folks know that I'm just speaking hypothetically. If you're my patient, you say, well, let me get to know you, Ron. Let me get to know what you're all about. Where are you coming from? What are your beliefs? That's, functional medicine is about those, belief systems, is spirituality, mind, body, and spirit. So where are you coming from? And then, what are we dealing with right now? Right this moment. Are you in that crash and burn mode? Because if you are, we may want to use some medication, at least if you're open to it, to kind of try to get the situation stabilized. And go ahead and start the lifestyle medicine, but let's cool off let's cool the jets a little bit. On the other hand, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask you, just because I know that it's going to be going on in folks' mind, is that the medications perhaps to control the inflammation at that point in an emergency basis or in that crash and burn type situation?
By and large, right? Broadly speaking, those are mechanisms of action. Each drug has a different mechanism of action, of course, but you're still looking at the two main processes that drive disease, which are inflammation and something called oxidative stress.
Okay. So being a functional neurologist, and you've made this rather clear to me, it's not drugs, surgery, or lifestyle, that it has to be a congruency of all the tools. In your book, the toolbox.
Toolbox gets bigger, right? For me, it got bigger. I didn't change toolboxes. So I'm not, to your listeners, I'm not saying everybody should go out there and take medication. That's not it at all.
I understand, right?
Yeah, for sure. It has to be what's right for that person. So, your story is truly unique. My story is truly unique. Dr. Wall's story is truly unique. And Dr. Walls did try a lot of medication that frankly didn't work for her
Okay.
ultimately. So we just got to figure out what's the right thing for you based on your personal story and presentation.
Okay. Another burning question that comes up quite often is there is a doctor out there. He's not a medical doctor, Brian Peskin, that has really made omega-3s to be this toxic compound if not used appropriately. Do you feel comfortable speaking on that at all? Or
Well, I'm not. I must say, first and foremost, that I'm not familiar with that person. But in our office, one of the things we do look at is the balance of fatty acids, particularly the balance between the omega-6 and the omega-3 fatty acids. Dr. Walls talks a lot about this at all. We think that in the traditional hunter-gatherer diets, that the balance between the pro-inflammatory omega-6s and the anti-inflammatory omega-3s were much closer to 1-to-1. And in my office, I'm comfortable with anything in the range of about a 5-to-1 to a 2-to-1 ratio. So 5-to-2, meaning you're going to have more omega-6s and omega-3. But in that general range, that's what science seems to tell us that is sufficient to help manage inflammation. One of the lessons of the book is that inflammation is certainly not all bad, right? We tend to make inflammation a bad thing in these discussions, but we need inflammation. I cut my hand the other day a little bit, and thank goodness for inflammation, because that's why my hand heals, and that's why I don't get an infection that goes down into my bone. So we need those responses.
just to unpack this a little bit for the folks that are watching. So the inflammation brings the good immune response that actually fights infection and actually starts the healing. The bradykinin, substance Ps, the macrophage. These are all different cells that are actually good aspects of inflammation at proper times.
And in proper doses, right?
Proper doses, okay.
Yeah, so it's involved in tissue repair. Many folks out there are listening, if they have autoimmunity and they've taken very high doses of steroids, they know that steroids can actually prevent healing, right? So that's actually, steroids are very, very, very anti-inflammatory. They're going to really suppress the inflammatory response. So that's not necessarily such a good thing. So it's always about balance.
Interesting.
So I'm all for omega-3s because one of the functions of the office environment is that we measure. It's about being precise. It's about measuring. What is your balance to omega-6 to 3? What do we need to do to bring that more into balance? Well, certainly eat more, cold water fish like, Alaskan salmon. But if that's not going to be sufficient, then we can definitely use some supplementation to take you there.
So as you describe it, as targeted supplementation, not just I'm going to buy the bottle and I'm just going to shoot them down every day, because that actually could be counterproductive, correct?
Could be counterproductive. In some cases, it could even be dangerous, right? So no doubt about it. There are therapeutic ranges for some of these nutrients. You can have some serious problems overdoing it with things like zinc, selenium. My opinion, very, very important. All these are important, but folate certainly gets a lot of attention, discussions about homocysteine, MTHFR, all that business, methylation. But if you're not careful, if you're not actually measuring what you're doing, I actually don't recommend using supplemental folate in high doses. Low doses, probably not going to get in trouble. And what I mean by that is anything under about, 500 milligrams or so, you're not going to get into, micrograms, you're not going to get into trouble, probably. But these very high doses without measuring, I think, would be unwise and unsafe.
And that goes for fat-soluble supplements such as vitamin K, vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin D.
Yeah.
That these bioaccumulate and become toxic,
They
correct?
can. Yes. Do we want to answer this question? Is there ever an appropriate time to use steroids?
Yes, doctor.
See? The appropriate time to use steroids for multiple sclerosis is for an acute flare-up. Bottom line, it's for an acute exacerbation.
And that specifically has been shown to help long-term disability by dealing with that problem, that acute problem in the short term, correct? Or,
right.
Well, okay.
Right.
Wait, there's lots of questions popping up, but this topic comes up quite a bit about cholesterol. Folks find that they start the Wallace protocol and their HDL and LDL go up, or whatever. But there's a change in cholesterol, and their physicians get very upset with them. Can you speak to that a little bit? I don't want to get into specifics or get into territories that.
Yeah, I think there are a couple key things to bear in mind. First of all, our bodies make cholesterol. We need cholesterol. Cholesterol is really important for things like our own natural production of cortisol and aldosterone, which is a hormone that helps to regulate electrolyte balance, but also things like progesterone, testosterone, the estrogens. They're all made from cholesterol. So first of all, cholesterol is a very important thing. It's very important for cell membrane integrity. You want to have nice fluid cell membranes, you got to have cholesterol. But that being said, I always liken it to maybe a container of cooking oil that you purchase. You put it up in your cabinet, and then you go 5 years later, you forgot about it, and oh my gosh, I bought this, I completely forgot. Well, don't use it. It's probably rancid, right? Throw it away. Not good. Right? So it's the same thing with cholesterol. Really, the important message is we're dealing with inflammation and oxidative stress, and things like low-density lipoproteins. They're very subject to that, to those basic, disease-driving processes. So I'll give you a perfect example. Today I saw a patient of mine who happens to have Alzheimer's disease, and we did something called a particle size study. She's actually pretty high total cholesterol, but she has absolutely no evidence of damaged LDL particles, and her HDL is exactly where it needs to be. So I'm really not terribly concerned at all. So I think that is a factor. Now, there's a second component to this, which is a little bit controversial, and it is a little bit of a personal opinion as far as the Wallace protocol is concerned, which is I do think that we have to have a balanced perspective on saturated fat, particularly those who carry a gene variant called ApoE4. I think the evidence is pretty strong that diets high in saturated fat may actually not be so good for ApoE4 carriers. That being said, as long as we're not, I've had patients come in, they think they're helping themselves and they're taking 8 teaspoons of coconut oil a day. That's just that's not a good idea. As long as we have a thoughtful, balanced approach, not necessarily avoiding saturated fats altogether, because if you eat a steak, a good piece of grass-fed beef, it's going to have, a spectrum of different fats in it. It's not going to be just saturated fat. It's going to have some omega-6, some omega-3, things like that as well. Just eat real food, and then we can take a look. I think that's important. No one would ever go out and say, well, I'm just going to eat 8 tablespoons of coconut oil. I think that's a good idea. Coconut oil is wonderful stuff. But that's not how you consume coconut oil. So if you wouldn't normally do that, don't think that you're healing your disease by consuming that much, coconut oil. You have to be reasonable about things.
So it's again trying to find that magic bullet and overconsumption and not the balance. And this was Cheryl's comment as well. There was an article that's been flying around Facebook about the American Heart Association. To be honest with you, when you see this stuff, I get bombarded with it. I don't know if the American Heart Association has said that, whether it's some type of website that's put it out there. So I don't necessarily want to demonize American Heart Association, but this is what her question applies to.
Right. Well, remember that a lot of these things are really in the context of the standard American diet as well.
Okay.
Right? So
okay.
I always have to, if you're not, it goes back to our earlier discussion, if you're not doing the basic stuff and then you're just going out and, eating a diet high in saturated fat, well, that's probably not such a good idea.
So I also understand, all right, now that we're on this topic, and I'm not going to keep it much longer because we've had you for about an hour, but so for example, if you're having a high carb diet, let's say donuts, that standard American diet, cookies, and on top of it, the saturated fat, that they work together against you. Whereas that if you had a more cleaner diet and had an increased saturated fat, you may be more protective. Or protect, that's not an accurate word, but it wouldn't quite to be such a negative effect on you, perhaps.
I would generally agree with that. I think as long as we're using food as food, in other words, not taking something out of context and trying to medicalize it. The exaggerated example that I gave of the person taking, 8 tablespoons of coconut oil, that's not using that food substance as food. I think you're probably fine. But, if you need to measure, let's measure. If you want to know if you have an ApoE4 gene, 1 or 2 copies, we can check that out. That's pretty easy to do. Most people can do it on their own. They get a 23andMe study done. So if you do happen to have ApoE4, you probably want to, first of all, get everything in general in balance, lower your insulin levels, do a low carb diet. Whether you want to explore ketosis or not, that's a separate discussion. But certainly in the long run, you probably want to emphasize your mono and polyunsaturated fats.
So just to emphasize more what you spoke to before, that when you talk about getting everything in order, you're talking about your diet, exercise, your mindfulness. This is a full package. This isn't just, I know too often myself, I'm very diet oriented, and I think, well, once I got that, then I'm finished, but not so.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to speak to this gentleman, his question is more about, Lyme's disease and chronic infections. They apply to disease. He mentioned even if they weren't autoimmune, they were tested negatives for autoimmune. Can you speak to that very quickly? Because, like I said, I don't want to keep you much longer.
Right. I think, let me just put it out there, and it may be a little controversial because, I do look at Facebook. I do read what people are posting, things like that. I'm sorry, there's no mistake. People say, well, I was diagnosed with MS, but in all actuality, I had Lyme disease. No, there really is MS. MS is a disease. Lyme disease is a disease. But what I think the real message is that earlier we were talking about systems biology. We were talking about how there are different functional systems. There's our system of defense and repair. That's a separate system. And there are things that essentially tip the scale toward disease, and chronic infections is one of them. Biotoxins is one of them. So whether that be mold, whether that be the spirochete bacteria that is Lyme, whether that be Epstein-Barr virus, which has been associated with things like MS, herpes simplex virus, been associated with Alzheimer's disease, it's important to recognize that that is one component of a bigger puzzle. So whereas we need to pay attention to those things, guess what? We still need to go back to the basic foundational stuff as well.
Thank you for that, because you've answered quite a few questions in that statement, and hopefully settled a lot of controversies, a lot of weight on people's minds. I'm going to thank you because you've been on for an hour and you've really touched on so many different topics that I know are on my mind, are on many, many folks' minds, and most informative. I finished your book today. I love your book. I highly recommend it. It's a bargain. It's 99 cents on Amazon. So I don't know.
Can't beat that.
No, it's not many things I could buy. I have 5 children. There's nothing much that I could buy for 99 cents anymore, unfortunately. So I would encourage that. And we could find you on in your work and your clinics. You have a website.
Functionalmedicine.doctor. Mm-hmm.
Functionalmedicine.doctor. You also have a Facebook page and a Twitter account, and as well as a YouTube page, or I'm not sure what the terminology for YouTube is, but a place you could go to YouTube and you could look up.
I have a YouTube channel. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. There you go.
Yeah.
YouTube channel, and which I frequented, and I learned quite a bit. You have a lot of miraculous stories on there, and very informative. And questions are coming in, but we're not going to get to those right now. We will do that another time. But I just can't emphasize enough how much I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to watching your work and in the future. And just keep up the good work. You and Dr. Walls are one of, if not premier, out of the box thinkers, pioneers, and it's people like you that keep us going. So. I can't appreciate that. I can't say that enough. Well, have a good night, doctor, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Look forward to coming back again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.